While coming in at number 6 is EastEnders, which is actually quite up from where it's been in the rankings. It's up 4 spots from 10th place, both in October and November. It's a weird spot for EastEnders because I feel like the only reason it's up is because the storylines are actually moving, which they were not doing at all in October and November. But the writing's still mostly not good, so it's hard to really praise the show that much. I think the reason for me why it's up is because I it was easier to watch, especially when I first watched it in October. I had it pretty close to as bad as The Young and the Restless, which is just boring. EastEnders was kind of the same. I talked about in that video how I felt like EastEnders had a long way to go to actually improve because not only were the storylines bad, but they weren't moving. But they did move up 4 spots because I do feel like it was at least more entertaining in December. I feel like each month has gotten a little more entertaining. I don't know if that's because producer John Sen is on his way out soon, so he wants to finish his own stories. Probably that is the case. He could finish them a little faster, even though some of the stories have been at like whiplash speed. I feel like, especially well, we'll get to whole Chelsea's pregnancy and all that. Another good thing about EastEnders is I felt like there was a lot of storylines going on at once. That's not the case for all of these soap operas in the rankings. So, I mean, when you have more storylines, even if some are bad, you'll occasionally get a good one. So that helps a lot too. I mean, I will start with the main story, I guess, which was the Gray story finally moving, kinda. I mean, I feel like it was a fake out that we were actually going to have a downfall for Gray, but they're gonna stretch it out as long as they can. Whitney had finally caught on to Gray's past with Chantel, well, and he was abusive, and then he ended up killing her. Uh, Whitney found that she found the old message board that Chantel was on, and it took a while for her to, figure out the password and all that. But once she finally did, she got to see Chantel's old posts from 2 years ago and her talking about Gray in those posts. So Whitney also got some advice from Kirat, who also has been on to Gray this whole time. He says he's been acting like Gray's friend to, kind of throw Gray off the trail that now they get along because they didn't get along back in the past because, Kirat kind of enjoyed Chantal's company back then. So those two seemed like they were maybe on track to finally take down Gray, but Gray and Chelsea's wedding was moving quickly, moving along. They tried to stop Chelsea from marrying Gray, although they didn't give her all the info before the wedding. Instead, Whitney gave her the posts from the message board after the wedding, but whatever. So the double wedding went on. Um, Chelsea and Gray got married. Denise and Jack got married. So the bad part of this is not only that the storyline is getting dragged out to keep Gray on the show, I guess, but also that I feel I've talked about this already on these rankings. But when you have a villain that gets as old as Gray and you have to dumb down everyone else around the villain's probably not working because that's bad writing if you have to dumb down everybody else to make the villain work and to make the villain continue to be able to get away with everything or whatever. I feel like, especially Denise in the storyline, not listening to her own daughter, Chelsea, at times, isn't making a whole lot of sense. There also came a point where Chelsea is trying to flee. Mitch is going to give her a ride, being the taxi driver, to the airport, but he just gets a call from Gray, and then Mitch, not listening to Chelsea being scared, Mitch, the father of Chantel, who used to be on to Gray back in the day, but now suddenly isn't, turns around and brings her back to Gray. It was just stupid. A lot of EastEnders right now, it feels like edging, honestly, because you think you're gonna get to a climax of a story, and then you don't because it's bad writing or it's just they're faking you out. I mean, that happens in soap operas a lot, but I feel like EastEnders, it's bad because the writing is pretty weak on a lot of these stories. So yeah, overall, that story finally had movement, but not good movement really, other than Whitney finally figuring out the truth about Gray. I guess Chelsea knows the truth too, but I guess right now they're between a rock and a hard place. I don't know. So we also had, I mean, there was a lot of Rocky in December. That was another story that finally moved along with, Sandy continuing to buy heroin and Rocky and Dottie trying to help her. But Rocky ended up lying to Dottie. So Dottie at Christmas finally told everybody, especially Sonia, that Rocky is not Sonia's father. He's really just a cotton. And finally, the truth came out about Rocky. I mean, that story moved. At the end of the month, Rocky had a heart attack. He's in the hospital. So we'll see if Rocky / Tom Cotton, what happens with that. I don't know. One of the other big stories has, of course, been Janine, who has returned to the show. She's been trouble. She's been back as a villain. She ended up setting Jay up with Billy, even though Billy tried to go against the setup. But Janine set up Jay to take the fall for the crimes she has been committing with the likes of Billy and Liam. The other big story turn for Janine this month or last month in December was her finally kissing Mick. She's been trying to get close to Mick. And then she went really villain, and when Linda finally returned, she ended up getting. She basically turned Linda and Mick against each other, got Linda drinking again, got Linda to try and call things off with Mick. So Janine's villain era continues. I mean, that's at least been entertaining. A lot of these stories have been entertaining, but EastEnders can be a show that just irks me. I think that's a good word for EastEnders. It irks me with the writing a lot. The other main story is probably Aaron, I guess we'll talk about. Keegan was attacked by Aaron's far right friends. Keegan was okay. But then Tiffany and Keegan were not able to work things out because Tiffany ends up leaving the show. Don't really care to talk about that. It happened. I feel like Tiffany's character went out looking dumb, kind of. I don't know if that's a good thing because I feel like she was a popular character, but I guess that's how it goes with the writing of the show currently. But yeah, so I mean, they've dealt with this kind of, white supremacist story with Aaron and his friend and them wanting to bomb a mosque, which Aaron ended up not doing on New Year's Eve, that even though that was the plan, his father ended up stopping him. I feel like they did the right thing with that story. Nobody wanted to see a bombing on New Year's Eve. They didn't need a stunt here. So I guess at least they took that story in more of like an approach of, hey, they're dealing with a real social issue, and it didn't go really over the top. So I will give them props on the writing for that story. That's probably one of the only stories I will give them props for. As you see, I have a lot of stories to talk about because I'm still not done. We have Eve blackmailed Ash. That was a mini story at the start of the month. It kind of came back around at the end of the month. Not a whole lot there, but that was one of the storylines. Stuart has male breast cancer. That's another issue that they're dealing with on this show. I mean, I think it's something that doesn't get talked about, male breast cancer, often because it's so rare, but at least they're dealing with that. Stuart can't grasp the fact that he has breast cancer and keeps lying to people. Sonia is the only one that actually knows the truth about that. And then the last story is, I guess, Kim and Phil. And Kim's been wanting to find out what happened to her husband back in the day. Kim was pissed that Denise already knew about her husband Vincent's death. And so they're trying to have Phil finally have a downfall. Is this show really going to have Phil have a real downfall? I doubt it. It's needed, though. I mean, in the end, Phil's basically going on the run with his son Raymond, who he had in a one night stand with Denise. So he's taken Raymond and going on the run. That's a story I don't look forward to watching in January. I don't need to see Phil on the run. So, I mean, yes, EastEnders is up 4 spots from 10th place to 6th place because the stories went from being super slow to really moving a lot in December. I think that's because John Sen's stories have to be coming to an end because he's not going to be the executive producer anymore. But I don't think January is set up to be great by any means. Will Gray finally have a downfall in January? At this point, I don't care because they keep stretching this storyline out way too much. I gave the Mina storyline on Emmerdale a lot of shit because that story has been also another villain that everybody else has to be dumbed down to make it work. And that's been dragged out for most of the year. But this Gray story has been dragged out for 2 fucking years. It's ridiculous. Anyway, a lot of storylines going on in EastEnders. The stories are finally moving. It was a much better month compared to the first 2 just because storylines were actually moving and things were happening. But the writing is still not good and needs a lot of work. And hopefully when John Sen is gone, the show will actually be in much better hands because it needs a new producer. It really does.